Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everybody is still active, and it's a hot topic. We had a wonderful panel discussion since morning, starting all the way from the cyber risk implementation and the cyber workforce pilot development, the cyber capacity building and education, the socio-economic the consideration for cyber risk, the cyber peace and warfare, and not but the least, the cyber security and the leadership. Before I request the panel to introduce themselves, the theme of this particular panel is about the emerging technologies and what are the security implications. You see my panel, very selectively we chose women on the majority. So give them a round of applause. And we'll start from all the way up to the left. Introduce yourself and start from there. Thank you.
So I have to start with two persons. Emerging technologies, but I don't know. So is this on? Okay. So I was hoping I would be the last one, but okay, that's how it is in life as well. So I'm Mihaela Uliero, a former researcher in Canada, research chair in e-society, with work mainly in self-organizing security. So I work with NASA Ames, I work with the Department of Homeland Security in the US, Canada, and all the allied forces on joint security operations for several cool stuff, both in cyber as well as in on the ground. So Vancouver Olympics were one of the main projects on which I focused. But my specialty as a researcher and as an academic and a professor of computer science is in distributed artificial intelligence. And more recently, I got involved with SingularityNet, which is a marketplace for artificial intelligence algorithms, and the creator of the first Android citizen, Sophia. Maybe many of you know her. So this is it for now.
My name is Julia Bossman. I'm currently entrepreneur in residence at Singularity University, which officially means I can do whatever I want there, but I also mentor the startups that work in emerging technologies that go through the global startup programs that they have. I'm also the past president of Foresight Institute and served on the Global Future Council at the World Economic Forum on artificial intelligence and robotics. And there I'm specifically working on potential ethical issues and risks in artificial intelligence. And besides that, I'm also involved in a venture fund that invests in neuroscience.
Hi everyone, my name is Samantha Rose Stein. I'm a global shaper with the World Economic Forum. I started my career building open source technologies, building and designing them for archival systems. And then ended up in Silicon Valley, scaling different startups and focused on privacy technology. Then I spent a few years with TechCrunch, predicting the startups most likely to exit or IPO and the trends we were going to see worldwide. And I'm also a media leader with the World Economic Forum. And currently I'm here this year in my capacity as a CSO of Kedit. So Kedit is a tech pioneer this year, and we work on privacy-enhancing technologies. Thank you for having me.
Hi everyone, my name is Gene Glovinsky, and by the way, I'm a substitute on the team, so but I'm also a security professional, that's why there's no picture. First of all, I am delighted, minus the moderator, to be a minority on the panel.
You're all excuses.
So I work for Intuit. For those that don't know, we are a proud maker of TurboTax and QuickBooks. And I've been with Intuit for a little bit over 5.5 years, and for last year I'm also very fortunate to lead Global Development Center in Tel Aviv, Israel. I am part of CISA organization. I'm leading the team which is called Security R&D, and both letters actually mean something there. We actually do develop internal security services for consumption of the large corporations. And as far as R goes, we actually do have an applied research team that's focusing on mostly on cryptography, but also on post-quantum technologies as well.
Thank you. One of our panel members spoke about we are in the mad world. So let's ease the dialogue using the emerging technologies. So we'll start with Sean. In your experience, what do you see as an emerging technologies evolving from? Go ahead.
Well, there are evolving technologies and emerging technologies that's been a promise for a while. Many of us remember IPv6, that's any day now, and that's been the case for 15 years. Still any day now, doesn't really change. There are newer ones, that's artificial intelligence, obviously reliving a renaissance. It's been very popular in the 80s, it's back, and hopefully now to stay. Blockchain's been around, the hype has been up and down a little bit subsiding. Generally speaking, my overall feeling is that every time that new technology stack appears, security is always an afterthought. And what that happens, it just creates a new technology challenge for security professionals to figure out how to secure the damn new thing. If you take conversational UI, for example, the whole concept of authentication that exists today, even including MFA, has gone out the window. And now everyone who talks to Alexa can use my credit card if I happen to be on the Amazon account and order, I don't know, books in good case, toys in less good case. So I think all of the new technologies, as long as the security is an afterthought, create that exactly same challenge. It creates for security professionals huge new blind spot. And just because we are trying to preserve the corporation and privacy of private citizens, we actually find ourselves all the time in front of the moving train. So I think in general for security, as a problem space, we need to figure out how to become more of an enabler, because inevitably today we're trying to slow things down and typically very unsuccessfully.
Go ahead. We'll have a follow-up question on that.
So is the question, what emerging technologies are interesting today?
Yes. What are the emerging technologies that you see in the future that is taking place?
So there's so many. I mean, I think we're here today to talk about security primarily. So of course, we're interested in things like artificial intelligence, and we're interested in how we're building stacks of Web3. So for example, Credit uses a number of cryptographic methods, including zero-knowledge proofs, which I find really exciting, in order to do things like create a privacy layer for blockchains and do private asset transfers, or combine ZKPs with AI to be able to understand fraud detection more easily, to reduce the amount of labor that would actually take. And so those things are very exciting.
Sure.
I think similarly, like when we see like, okay, what is an emerging technology? People like to point out to like the Gartner hype cycle, where things get really exciting, you hear about it and then you don't hear about it. So when you stop hearing about it, that's actually when it's about to emerge, because people got sick of hearing it was going to do all these amazing things, and then they didn't see it materialize because we're impatient and it takes a while. And of course, in different fields, there's different spans for that. And I like to think of things in terms of the thesis, well, what's slightly too soon? Or another way to frame that is, what was a taboo that's no longer a taboo, and why? So it's really, what is the shifting and permanent, social, cultural, political, business constraints that move around and make things then possible? And what is a taboo now that won't be in the future? And so if you think of it that way, you kind of think of what will be really, really exciting technologically.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think one interesting phenomenon when we think about emerging technologies is this phenomenon of infrastructure 2.0, where in the developed countries we often see novel technologies as an added feature or an add-on. For example, we have banking, and then you can do also banking with your phone. However, in developing countries, because of the new technologies, they can leapfrog and not even need to build all the existing infrastructure that we have in developed countries. For example, they don't need phone lines anymore because everyone can have a mobile phone. In some places where they don't have roads, they have drone delivery. And instead of banking where the phone is an added feature, they do all of their banking and all of their monetary transactions with their phones. So when we think about new technologies, we need to shift from just thinking of making existing things easier, as we're building new infrastructure where in many parts of the world that's the only infrastructure that exists. So therefore we need to design it to be resilient.
Yes, so when it comes to the future, yes, What I can say for sure is that we live in an age of irreducible uncertainty. We really don't know what will happen because of the convergence of technologies. So AI, blockchain, IoT, quantum, all of them are coming together and they start to build on each other. Ray Kurzweil, when it comes to artificial intelligence, he anticipates that by 2029 AI will reach the human intelligence level. And Ben Goertzel, who is the chief scientist of Sophia, the android, anticipates by 2045 we will have the superintelligence, and that means the AI which builds on each other, algorithms, and recreates each other. And actually, every 5 minutes you have a new Nobel Prize kind of discovery level with those AIs. So how about security in those times? But we can talk about that with the next question.
Sure. So I want to follow up on the one key topic on emerging technologies, the quantum technology or quantum computing. In your experience, both from the academia as well as a research point of view, or from the industry-specific point of view,
The question is, do we really care in 10 years if my conversation of 10 years ago was broken or not? So that's the question out there, and I don't know if I do care. Secondly, if you look at the data at rest, again, there are several school of thoughts around crypto that maybe it's not completely broken, but just weakened from AS256 to AS128. It still will take considerable amount of compute effort to break it brute force. But there's another angle to that. If you're storing data and you're encrypting data, you're probably subject to your own data retention policy, key rotations and re-encryptions. So I'm not entirely convinced that that's a clear and present danger.
Thank you. Slightly on the same topic, but before I ask the question, my view on when the world is moving in the next 5 years towards the 5G technologies, and every emerging technology will be on the cloud computing, whether we like it or not. Your experience on how the cloud computing is shaping up, because except the financial industry, hardly any industry moving their data into the cloud, but we are already talking about the hybrid cloud also. How do you see that hybrid cloud or the cloud computing is shaping up the industry across the lines, across the business lines? And what are the key technologies that is going to be? It's not just one or two companies like Amazon or Microsoft or Google, not just a few companies, but those technologies are going to shape up your future hybrid computing.
Are we talking about like Nimbus Stratus, Alto Cumulus, which cloud?
Right, up in the air, right?
Up in the air, okay.
It depends upon the company size and also available technology on the 5G in the future.
Yeah, so I want to riff a bit off of what you just mentioned and then answer this question a little bit indirectly, which is that I think that's a great question, and another question we should be asking ourselves is how do we actually reduce data burdens, especially in the wake of so much legislation like GDPR, and we're only going to increasingly have privacy regulation, because right now it's not just the way enterprises are using data, but all the B2C use cases, we're basically collecting the digital subconscious of people and using it as a profit center. That's how businesses work with that, because without there's not many standards for health and well-being. And so when you see that, you can predict that we're only going to have much, much, much more legislation in this area, and then you can predict that we're going to need to have more like almost HIPAA compliant or even stricter standards. And so that lends the perspective that you could predict that you would want to reduce data burdens themselves. We don't want to be sharing data as often. This is one of the reasons actually I left TechCrunch to join Ketit, because when you look at where cryptographic methods are going, zero-knowledge proofs are one of the great applications where you can actually know information with certainty without taking on additional data burdens.
Thank you.
Yeah, the big trend we see with cloud computing and hybrid clouds is that the cloud providers take on more and more of the complexity that comes up in running a business. And things that used to be managed in-house can more and more be outsourced into the cloud, and services that manage that complexity for the company. And this allows companies to be leaner and to be more nimble and dynamic, because they no longer have to build everything in-house. They can just use existing cloud services and offerings to do that. And I think Samantha is making an important point there with the cloud becoming so ubiquitous and handling so much of corporations' vital infrastructure. We need to think about something like HIPAA compliance or other kind of regulations that ensure that these services are safe and reliable. Because right now, it's kind of the Wild West. The cloud providers basically can do what they want and the customers just deal with it. But I can see a future where once also government and regulation becomes aware of the incredible value and importance of cloud servers and providers to the entire business infrastructure in a country, that they may put safeguards into place.
Yes, and here as well, I have quite a strong opinion, and I want to quote, to say a quote. In the age of the intelligent machine, the only critical skill for success is the ability to ask the right question. And I think your question was absolutely the right question, because I see that as very triggering for me in the first place. Because the mission of our company, SingularityNet, is to take the AI from the power of the oligopoly and give it back to the people. And with the World Economic Forum, I'm with the Council of Data-Driven Development. I'm very sensitive when people talk about cloud and people's data and where is that and is it my data? And therefore I'm such a great believer in blockchain, because that can really, SingularityNet is a marketplace. We could have done that in the cloud, but we do it on blockchain because we want to give people the opportunity to offer their data and be rewarded. Also offer their algorithms, and if someone else is using them, to be rewarded. So it's AI by the people, for the people. And I will have to say much more about the security implications of building that, because people will favor, I believe, artificial intelligence which is benevolent and compassionate and works for us, versus how the oligopoly is using it today with the cloud to sell, gamble. I mean, we train the algorithms to sell, gamble, kill, and spy. Yes, practically this is what we train the AI for in the cloud. While I hope, and I do hope, that when people are going to have a say in that, they will build a completely different kind of AI. So thank you for the question.
Let's please build compassionate intelligence. Remember, safeguard technology, use it as a tool for good. I also want to give a big plug real quick to Julia. I know that she's brilliant on this topic, AI and many topics, but also when we're looking forward and talking about the future in which there are real drastic responses to the health and well-being of humanity based on technology. One of the initiatives that you may not be aware that Julie actually started is the Red Circle, which has to do with teaching people emotional literacy and emotional first aid. And so her deep knowledge in technology has also informed how we need this in society as well. So just a quick plug, and that really ties back to security and how we're handling these things. Yeah, can we actually just give her a quick round of applause? That's pretty incredible.
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's in the spirit of resilience, creating resilient communities, and I also care about resilient infrastructure. And I think you made a valid point that AI can be used for bad applications, but it's really a tool and it can be used for a lot of good too. One of the startups I'm advising, the founders actually in the room right now, they're using artificial intelligence to improve education and making education accessible to places where the brick and mortar education may not serve. So again, the leapfrogging infrastructure. Yeah, and there are many other applications in medicine and health and science where AI really elevates humanity.
Just back maybe to hybrid cloud point. Sorry about that, I'm going to bring it down a notch.
We'll light it back up in a second, don't worry folks.
Hybrid cloud is an interesting phenomenon, but I think depends on what hybrid cloud we mean, is that between your data center and the public cloud, or between two public clouds, or three or four, or however many providers you might have. So if you're talking about the data center to public cloud, I think that's a transient state, and I think eventually it will evaporate. It may be long going, a few years, maybe 5, maybe 10, but it seems to be going one direction. Like we went from desktop to server farms to virtualized environments to data centers and then to the cloud. Seems to be trending that way. Now, when you're talking about hybrid cloud between two different public cloud providers, that's a completely different topic. And I think that one is still emerging because right now people mostly go into one cloud because that's all they can afford. But eventually the traditional fear of vendor lock-in will kick in and people will start diversify somehow. And it's back to the situation because there's no standard, there's no interoperability, and every player will be in there for their own trying to figure out how to interoperate between two competing or three competing public cloud providers, basically creating pretty untenable security issue. So that's one. Second one is it's a data privacy. Resonates very well with us as a company. We actually, as a company, introduced data stewardship principles about 10 years ago, before GDPRs, before anything else. Because dealing with the tax data of American taxpayers, we took it very seriously early on, that it's not really our data, that's our customers' data. So it's not, we're not using for commercial purposes, basically. So when GDPR kicked in and CCPA kicked in, we may have not been completely ready technologically to automate everything, but conceptually it was no struggle for us. And I know we're not the only company with a social responsibility like that out there.
Thank you. Before we go on to the second theme of the topic about the security implications, I would like to see if the audience have any questions before we move on to the second topic. Please, state your name and...
Sure, Mirich Davidescu. I work on big data innovation at Fair Square Financial, a financial company based in the US. I actually have a question about artificial intelligence, and while it has great potential, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this actually being used to propagate the biases and inequalities that we have in our current society, because they're trained on data that are produced by an unequal society, and then it will make predictions that result in greater inequality.
It's a great question.
I just have to say one thing which I wanted to say in the beginning, which is the technology and some panels before, I think the cyber war panel was mentioning about that. But technology is definitely a reflection of humanity. So who are we as a society and as a species right now is reflected in our technology. So that this chatbot which Microsoft unleashed on Twitter is a clear reflection of what's happening in society and as well in cyberspace and so on and so forth. So I think the question is more how can we get out of that bias? So I'm not going to, I just open the floor to my colleagues here to answer that.
So thank you for the question. It's a really, really important question when we're talking about, first of all, our privilege to all be here in Davos, sitting on a beautiful mountaintop, talking about the future of cybersecurity. What a dream. We're so lucky. We're supposed to be deciding things for the future, so we have a ton of responsibility to use our powers for good. And it's a really important question because it's not just, so first of all, it's not an exact reflection of society, it's an abstraction interpretation of it. And that's an important differentiation because there's some things which can be corrected and we can understand as a true reflection and some things which are not. I think the thing that kind of keeps me up the most at night in terms of your question is that we're evolving IP protections in this space towards algorithms. Right now, you can secure IP around an algorithm, but that's also highly problematic. And the reason why is because when we understand how decisions are made, we can understand when injustices or biases are embedded within them, and there are, and it takes time to even see that there are. Sometimes it takes a really, really long time. Or sometimes it takes us 100 years to realize that we did something horribly wrong, and we look back and we're like, how do we do that? So lack of transparency makes it much, much harder. And when you look at IP protections around algorithms, you basically have a black box of data, and the result is right now, there's people being denied jobs, there's people being given like social credit scores, and I'm not talking about China, I'm talking about algorithms that are used online to target people for different commercial goods and otherwise, and give them different rates, and you don't know how those decisions are made. What we do know is that a lot of biases exist within them, and there's people, for example, who can't rectify these data records, and a lot of them are like brown box data that's being aggregated and then used in shrouded algorithm. So we don't have the transparency there, and as a result, there's people whose lives are really negatively impacted. So of course there's biases across gender, class, socioeconomic background, and race. There's also people who have misappropriated data in their records, and there's no way in that system to rectify it. So I believe there's a book called The Data Black Box Society by Pascal, which breaks down tons of examples of this, and I encourage everyone in this room to really take agency as leaders here to think about these questions and think about how some people's lives are being tremendously harmed by that. And it's not an easy problem to solve. I really don't know the answer, but I know that we should be hyper aware of it. So there was in that book one example of a woman whose job record had something attached, as if she had a criminal record when she didn't, and because of the way this whole system operates, had no way to correct it and couldn't get a job, even though it was just a misappropriation of data to her record, and there was HR systems using this. So that's a really, really important question, and thank you for asking it.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And you may be familiar with the example that the US judicial system used an algorithm to predict whether somebody who is released from prison on probation would reoffend or not. And the way this network was trained is that a bunch of variables were fed in, and then it would just make the decision yes or no. What we saw in it, that it had a bias towards skin color. So black people would more often be denied probation, whereas white people would more often be granted. And it also illustrates the path towards rectifying biases, because what we need is to audit these systems and figure out how are these decisions made and what is it based on. What turned out in that particular system is that it used the postcode of where the person was living as a factor, which is highly correlated with racial minorities, and basically someone's race is highly correlated with the postcode that they live in. So once we can audit them, then we can see where the bias comes in and how it's made. And this is a problem with a lot of neural networks, is that it, like Samantha said, a brown box is fairly intransparent how these decisions are made. But there are efforts going on to audit these systems, to visualize what's happening so that we can understand it.
We call that narrow AI, by the way, and for we are the proponents of artificial general intelligence. Ben Goertzel had invented that and wrote the book, the Bible, about that. More of a mind, not just yes or no on a narrow kind of thinking of data.
Quick follow-up on that. Can you comment on the people that are actually building the code that is creating the bias? So the diversity of the workforce that is needed to not have that bias. Please.
Yes, so I think that's a very valid argument you're making, that if we look at Silicon Valley, the average Silicon Valley engineer is not the average citizen of the United States or the world even. And one thing we've tried to implement at Foresight Institute is somewhat akin to a Hippocratic oath for engineers, so that they not just do things for their own interest, but for the benefit of the world and keep the bigger perspective in mind. The other part of that equation, though, is that even somebody who has no biases of their own, which is not humanly possible, but if we assume it like a spherical cow, if you just go on the internet and search for images, like just search of the image of a hand, then more than 95% of all those images are images of a white hand. If you search for a doctor, those doctors are typically white, male, and middle-aged. So the data that exists out there is already biased just based on how it was created in the first place.
Thank you.
Yeah, please, question in the front.
So I actually happened to speak on this issue in front of a group of judges who utilize this sort of predictive analytic tool in sentencing and deciding bail issues. And they have no clue that they're using a tool that has not only implicit biases built into it, but also at times inaccuracies. So even aside from that, I think you make a very valid point that not just where we're talking about in a criminal context, but in everyday life, whether it be a loan, insurance, education, the list goes on and on. These tools are being used. What are your thoughts about taking on, you mentioned sort of like a Hippocratic oath, what are your thoughts on this talk about imposing a fiduciary-like obligation on the part of those who are undertaking the use of these kinds of tools?
I think that's critical, and thank you so much for sharing that and for doing that important work. Another example of how that impacts people is, mental health used to be a stigma. Mental health is something everyone should pay attention to as much as their bodily health, right? Like our minds simply exist to interpret our actual bodies, emotions, and feelings, and we forget that because we live up here a lot, especially if we're on this mountaintop. So, another example of this being just really, really impacting people in a negative way is that, there was examples of credit card companies saying that people were going to therapy and counseling and then giving them higher rates for loans and things, when really it should be the reverse. And that sort of is built into the bias culturally we've had as mental health being stigmatized. So there's all these nuanced ways it's impacting us. I definitely think in the same, so when I say that technology is a mediation layer for reality, and the ubiquity of the way that we use technology today creates a digital subconscious that someday we'll be able to own and have IP over, that's also related to our physical mental health, right? So this is looking way in the future where these things are going. In the right now, even at the nascent stages of these things being built, we think we're really into it, but it's still pretty nascent. We of course need to have ethical and fiduciary duties. I don't really know of anyone who's working on that I can be like, yes, these guys are the best. I wish I did. I wish I had 5 to list. So if you're in this room, you're kind of bored with your job, you're looking for the next thing, you're trying to figure out what breaks your heart. If this issue breaks your heart, or if you're seeing this recording, please go out and do something about it. And in whatever capacity you can, keep it in mind and do something about it. And just commend and applaud people who ask these sorts of questions and who stand up for these sorts of rights.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is clap for them real quick. This is so important.
Yeah, go ahead. 30 seconds.
Okay, this is part of the work at the World Economic Forum is speaking truth to power. And at the Global Future Council for Artificial Intelligence, we would say, in an ideal world, and hopefully in the future, if we do this work right and keep advocating for it, there would be an independent institution that audits these algorithms.
Thank you. I got a second and third warnings from Val, but this is a very important topic about how to eliminate the cognitive bias. And probably if Val and Harold and everybody agree, then we can continue this tomorrow. And please come back.
You gotta come back here?
Yes, because this is definitely an important topic. Before I end, one last question. We covered the future technologies, the 5G, robotics, cloud. I'll give a panel 5-10 seconds each. What do you see the security implications for the future using these emerging technologies? You go first.
All right, I'll go first.
10 seconds.
Don't.
Give it back 3 seconds.
So look, one of my mantras is I don't want to know other people's secrets. That way I can disclose them. So to me, this is particularly important in the cloud, and this goes back to fiduciary responsibility of the data we collect. It doesn't belong to us, but to our customers. Homomorphic cryptography really, to me, is the promised land, where you can actually deal with the data, do operations of the data without decrypting that. And quite honestly, machine learning or encrypted data, going back to AI, is one of the ways potentially to solve social problems without dealing with the human biases. I don't know if we can ever get to that, but if I don't have to actually know the data I'm running machine learning models on, I'm at least a step forward there.
Thank you.
Going off of that, I think homomorphic encryption combined with techniques like zero-knowledge proofs, which allow us to not take on data burdens and allow us to live in a future where privacy isn't a luxury that only people who can afford it can have. Privacy is a human right, and data should be something that keeps us safe sovereign and enlightened, ideally through the collective intelligence, and then lift society up. So we want to find ways where we can share that and be incentivized to do that in a safe way.
Yeah, besides all the already valid points about cloud computing, one thing I want to keep in mind is that whatever we have in a cloud still is stored on physical hard drives somewhere. So, cloud servers in these huge data centers still exist in physical space somewhere on our planet, and the local national laws apply to them. They can be targets of foreign actors as well. So one thing when we think about geopolitical conflict is that a foreign actor could target data centers in a country and then just erase a bunch of knowledge and basically blind the software and services that are running there. And this is the risk of a new library of Alexandria burning down if it were to come to that. So we want to keep in mind that they're still physically there.
Thank you.
The first people who spoke could not predict World War I, but they could prepare the transition for their children. We cannot predict what will be in this age of tumultuous technology advances. What we can do, though, is to think about it in an altruistic way. I would call it altruistic leadership, even to what we applauded here, and design and set the premises for those technologies to evolve and co-evolve with humanity. Hopefully we will evolve as well beyond war and peace, and actually help us evolve towards a benevolent world.
Thank you.
No, security will be a non-issue in that world.
It's a great panel discussion, and I can assure that the world is still mad world with an emerging technology. So with that, I'll hand over to Val, and one more round of applause to
Thank you. This was great. I'm glad we are together. So one last panel picture, and then I didn't want to interrupt this panel on that.
Where's the paparazzi? We're looking.
Okay, let's
Switch him up.
one lady.
Mix it up a little bit.
No. All together.
Say cybersecurity.
Cybersecurity solution in a smart.
All right, thank you. I don't know, we talked about cloud so much. Where are you when you're 10 years back when I don't know, this organization, few of us, we founded the Cloud Security Alliance. That was 10 years back. And people just thought this was a hype, it will go away, and and now we're talking about the world going into cloud rather than all right, great. So the next session, without not just having a panel, I think everybody was like waiting to ask questions. So we'll open it up a little bit. Okay.